All right, moving on to our kind of next trio here. For the podcast listeners, this is a real like kind of in podcast curveball. For the video viewers, this is gonna it's kind of its own thing. But with these last three guys, instead of just kind of breaking them down and talking about them in a pretty rote way, we thought it was going to be a little bit more interesting to kind of face them up head to head, like in versus style. Now, this is not necessarily to say that we all had one of these guys at the top of our board after watching these guys, but I think we all had a guy that we were clearly higher than the other guys on, or at least a little bit higher than the other guys. And so we're gonna set this up a little bit differently, where we're gonna start with someone, and Coop is gonna give the sell on that person, and then Stone and I are gonna push back a little bit, and then we'll talk about his value, and then I'm gonna give the sell on someone. We're going to talk about their value a little bit, and then et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end, we will all kind of rank, where we have these guys. But I just thought this was a fun little something we're going to try out and see, because we're officially to the point in the draft. I now have, like 45 guys ranked or something like that. And we're getting to guys that are we're getting to at least a group of guys that are at least in some ways like not particularly NBA prospects to me. And then there's, we're watching a lot of guys like that. And then there's one or two that are really interesting. Not necessarily with this group, but with some of the groups we have coming up. So this is kind of a fun way to when you're getting this late in the draft, it's kind of like staking your claim. Like, hey, I really like this. And so we're going to set up that way. And we're going to start with a late riser, and that's Yanic Konan Niederhauser. Now, in America, he seems to be known more specifically as Yanic Konan, and then in FIBA stuff, he was Yanic Niederhauser. I don't know why that is, but that is, for whatever reason, how it tends to be laid out. But Yanic is a big guy. So Yanic measured at the combine, and the combine is really where a lot of the interest in him came from. He measured at 6'11" and a quarter without shoes. So a real 7 foot, probably not quite 7'1" like he was listed, but legitimately big. 7'3" and a quarter wingspan, 9'3" standing reach. So a good, not like elite standing reach, but a plus standing reach. Also had a 37-inch max vert and a 33.5-inch standing vert, which is obviously really, really good. Measured with fairly solid sized hands too. Has 9.5 by 9-inch hands, which is actually kind of small for a guy this big, but still worth noting. I like bringing up hand sizes with bigs, especially. It tends to factor in more to their game. Wings, it can some. I mean, obviously a Kawhi Leonard, a Cedric Coward, hand size has been at least a part of their evaluation, but it does matter some with Niederhauser too. But I'm going to give kind of his basic stats, and then I'm going to let Coop rock with it. This year, playing for Penn State, so he started his career at Northern Illinois, and has just kind of worked his way up from there. Ended up going to Penn State this year, and this season he averaged 12.9 points per game, 6.3 rebounds, 0.8 assists, 0.7 steals, and 2.3 blocks. He did that on 61.1, 9.1, 66.4 shooting splits. Overall, this year he only played about 25 minutes a game, played in 29 games. He's also already 22. He's a March 14th, 2003 birthday. He will turn 23 a little over, halfway through his rookie season. His rookie season will be his age 22 season. So he's kind of old for his class too. If you think about the age timeline, he's not particularly young. He is from Switzerland. He's Swiss. He's played on the Swiss national team. And he's kind of been he's played on their younger teams coming up as well. For some slightly more advanced stats, this season he had a 114.9 offensive rating, a 4.9 box plus minus, 22.9 usage rate with a 61.3 effective field goal rate and a 63% true shooting, 10.1 offensive rebound rate, 19.9 defensive rebound rate, a 6.1 assist rate to a 16.1 turnover rate, not great. 10.2 block rate is really good. And when you compare that to his foul committed per 40, which is 4, it's not particularly good, but it's still kind of a worthwhile trade-off there. He had a 56% free throw rate, which is really good. He dunked 58 times, shot 69.2% on 182 close twos, 39% on 41 long twos. And again, did take 11 total threes, but only made one. Coop, the floor is yours. Sell us a little bit here on Yanic Konan Niederhauser.
So to me, the sell with Niederhauser is that this is a guy who can actually get into the rim or into the lane and finish everything. This is a highly athletic. I mean, he basically only got on boards after he tested well at the combine athletically. He can really get up. He's a very real lob threat in a way that a lot of these guys who are just huge athletes aren't. He actually has pretty decent hands just because his hands are humongous. If you just hit him, if you put the ball anywhere near him on the roll, you can throw it up high, you can throw it down low in the lane. He's got pretty quick reaction time, which is one of those things that I think a lot of these just slower are these bigger bigs who are seen as just run and jump lob threat guys. They don't really have. He's got 2 or 3 moves in the lane. He can do his little spin and hook shot thing. He has a little bit of a push. I wouldn't say his touch is particularly good, but this is a guy who played 58% of their minutes and dunked 60. He attempted 64 dunks. He finished the ball still. He dunked a lot of poorly thrown lob passes. You don't have to time them up as well as you'd think with a guy like Niederhauser because he's pretty quick twitch off the ground. He's got good hands. And the big thing for me is that he's so fast and he has a really good feel for playing out in transition that if you have this guy and somebody else grabs the rebound, he is darting down the floor and putting pressure on the opposing defense just by existing. The fact that he is so fast and so quick to go in transition, it's so hard for teams to guard because it brings in all their guys. It allows you to set up transition threes. It allows you to get going in a real transition offense. And there's not very many 7-footers who can be legit, transition threats in the way a guy like Niederhauser can. You can run a guy like Jokic off the floor in regular season games. You can run these slower footed big men that have kind of come back into vogue off the floor, even if he's not particularly talented. Just his existence puts pressure on the defense, even if he's not the most skilled. So I guess we'll open the door to some questions if you guys are ready to ask.
Yeah. So my first big one is he was in the 57th percentile on 80 post-ups with a sub 50% effective field goal rate, an 18.8% turnover rate. And overall, I was just really worried by his offensive feel in general. You mentioned you thought he had good feel in transition. How limiting is the lack of feel? I mean, obviously, also, really low assist rate guy, doesn't really, pop as any type of, basically any of the feel metrics, including things like steal rate, fouls committed, that type of stuff. He doesn't really pop to me in any of those. And on film, I didn't buy the feel much at all. So what am I missing here that you think he might be at a baseline level of feel?
So the problem there is that I don't think he does. I don't think he to be a starting level rim runner. I think you have to meet a baseline level of feel, right? If you want to be a Clint Capella, if you want to be even like a Gafford, you have to have these other things in your bag to kind of have in case the play goes south, right? You have to have counters. You have to have the feel to execute plays. I don't think Niederhauser has that to any insane degree. I think he has just enough offensive, if you give him time in the post, he can make passes. I do also think part of that is schematic. He just was not put in a position where he ever needed to pass. His team was so bad that it was just better for him to take the shot most of the time. So I think that can kind of explain the assist rate. And I think when he had the opportunity, he wasn't an awful passer, but it would not be something I draft him with the idea of wow, I really think he can develop into a, some kind of hub or anything like that. I just don't think it's disqualifyingly bad in the way that disqualifying from the NBA bad in a way that the stats would kind of indicate that it is. Because there's flashes. There's enough flashes. And one of the fun things with Niederhauser actually is if you go and watch their last game against Indiana. There's 3 or 4 times in that game where he is on an island with Umar Bayo. He has Umar Bayo on an island, and he cooks him in isolation and takes him all the way to the rim, gets an easy layup, clean break. There's some stuff like that across the rest of the season. And him doing that to Umar Bayo, who's like not an NBA player, is not the most impressive. But that combined with his transition feel, there's some grab and go stuff, I think is, at least enough to stake a flag on this is not a hopeless player from a feel and skill perspective, right? And I think that's enough for a guy who puts so much pressure on the rim for opposing teams.
I think my question would be how much hope is there for someone that is his age now? Like if Yanic were 18, like he'd legitimately be like an easy lotto bet for me. Like this is a guy I'm willing to bet on. But at 22, there is some pretty major field concerns. Like I think he had some pretty bad turnovers, I feel like, where he's like just making simple travel or double dribble mistakes. He has some like intriguing post moves, but the execution is poor, where he's not really understanding the personnel, the opponent that he's going against. Like you mentioned, that game with Balo, where he's making some interesting post moves, but in a way that is not advantageous against someone that has a 7'7" wingspan. Like I think there's stuff there. It's just where you want it to be for someone of his age, and it should be much further along in the field department, I feel like. And you mentioned the hands. That was a note where I disagree quite a bit, where I think the hands are pretty bad. I'm interested to hear what Bryce thinks on that, but I guess overall my question after your guys' conversation would be like how much does the age factor in here for a guy that still has fairly low feel?
So that would be what keeps me from putting him in my first round, right? I think he's still in an era where the second round has just, it feels like it's evaporated over the last few years since we started doing this. I think a guy like Konan Niederhauser, who has like, I do think the athleticism is outlier at his height. We talk about any 7-footer with an ounce of athleticism as like an insane, all this stuff. He's outlier. He's a monster, all this stuff. Niederhauser is actually that guy by his athletic testing. And I think it plays out on the floor. I think the feel holds him back, but this is a guy who was truly just like athletically dominant in a few different ways. Right. And as much as the age is difficult to really come to terms with, I still think that there's a world where he gets like taken at 35. He gets the Mitchell Robinson, like he's a late pick who gets a little bit of time to develop, and just his tools and ground coverage and that kind of thing just allows it to click just enough to the point where he's a valuable off the bench piece. And in the draft, you're looking for guys who have the chance to be outlier, right? To me, even in the second round, you're looking for guys who have the chance to do something really special, even if they like, I do think Niederhauser is most likely just a specialist on both ends. But that could be a very valuable specialist. I think truly fluid athletic bigs like him are exceedingly rare, to the point where people try to make anybody who shows even like a tenth of what Niederhauser showed into a lottery pick. I do worry about the age. There's worries about the feel. But at a certain point, that bet is worth taking. I'm not here to advocate for him being a lotto pick, because like you, if he was 18 doing this and he had the exact same statistical production, I'd be all in. Even a few years ago at the same point on his age curve, I'd be all in. But I think there are just too many red flags for me to be all in. I don't know. I don't have much else to add. He's a simple evaluation. Bryce said, we were texting yesterday, you said this would take 20 minutes. We're at 15.
So I have one more question for you before we get into everything else. I honestly thought the defense was pretty bad despite the 10.2 block rate. I thought he wasn't much of a factor around the rim other than when he was blocking shots. Thought he was fairly contact averse despite being like he looks really strong. Like, and some of it's that he wears a loose ass jersey, but like he looks strong. Like he should be, really making an effort around the rim, beating guys outside. But I thought the reaction time was bad. And I just thought he wasn't consistently affecting shots. And he's also not someone who could, really survive out on the floor. Now, some of that, they had him like in a hedge for a lot of the season, which was just like complete nonsense. Like I think Mike Rhodes is a great coach. Why would you have this 7-foot giant who can't move his feet in a hedge? I just don't understand. But I thought the defense was bad. And I think for a guy like this to even be a role player, bench big in the NBA, a player like this has to have better defense than Niederhauser had. So do you think the defense meets that kind of passable level and I'm missing something? Or where are you kind of at with the defense?
I just think that in the league right now, the bar for backup bigs is lower than we think, right? Defensively, if you can do something that adds real value to an NBA floor, there's you still have guys like DeAndre Jordan sitting around in the NBA who can't jump anymore and are just get killed every single possession on the defensive end. But because his positioning is all right and he can just kind of execute a scheme all right, he's still sticking around in the league. And obviously they don't want him to be their long-term guy. They have Daron Holmes, but it's the dearth of real special 7-footers. I think these guys kind of, even like a guy like Jackson Hayes sitting around in the NBA. Obviously, the Lakers don't want him as their starting center, but he's a fine backup big in the NBA, and I think he's a god awful defender. Luka dragged Derek Lively as a rookie, who was a good for a rookie, but a bad defensive center in the league to the finals. He was a huge part of that run. And obviously Lively's a much better prospect, much better player. But I do think that if you can hit just like some bar of pretending to be competent as a 7-footer defensively, you can, and one who can actually move and like pretend to play in a drop, like I think Niederhauser can. I don't think he actually affects a ton of shots on the defensive end. There's a lot of worries. But if you can move enough and, just like understand some simple stuff in a scheme, I think he can survive off the bench. I don't think that it's like a bet that I really want to buy long-term. I think there's the tools there for him to long-term be a plus defender, but it's not something that I draft him coming in to be like, hey, this guy's going to play in a drop and really affect shots long-term. And, as much as I want to look at the age and be like, well, it's a really hard sell, I do still think there's some room for development there. I do feel like he was so raw at early points, and seeing how much better he's gotten over the last few years is a really encouraging sign. He has grown, even if it's just like from completely unplayable in bad college basketball to playable in the Big Ten for stretches. Seeing this kind of growth is encouraging. It's good to see a guy actually get better, actually improve. And development's not linear. As much as I want to sit and be like, well, he's so old, there's all this stuff, I still want to. He's the kind of guy who you want to give a shot because of the outlier athleticism and just see if you can get a little bit more out of him every single year. See if you can get him above the passable rate to where he can actually impact your team defensively.
I think that is fair. I'm going to give kind of my kind of overall value take here, and then I'll let you guys kind of give yours. I think it's easy to squint and see something here. He's a late bloomer. I think the age matters, but also this is a guy who bloomed late and kind of got onto the prospect scene late, right? He has obvious size. He's elite vertical pop. Now, I do think the top end vertical overrates the kind of athlete he is. Like, I kind of disagree with you, Coop, that he's like a great transition threat. Like, I don't think he runs the floor consistently really well. I think he'll have moments of it. And he's pretty much a 2-foot leaper all the time. Like, he can, just by nature of being as big as he is, like, he can dunk off 1 foot, out of the flow. But for the most part, he's a hard left-right pound, type leaper. He can get up quicker. He can get up off little pops. Like, he is a good vertical athlete, but I don't think he's like an extraordinary type vertical athlete or anything. He flashes some toughness and ability to use his athleticism, and he was misused. Like, he hedged every ball screen. The guards around him and the spacing around him were bad. This is a guy that you should have been just finding a way to get him to play in like some spread pick and roll, or some, if you wanted to do some classic college roll replace stuff, you could. And he just wasn't used in that way enough. But I personally think the feel is like devastatingly bad. I think he might stick around the league for a while. I think the floor here is like a Damian Jones, who was never worth a shit in the NBA, but still got 5 or 6 years of playing some real minutes because he was a 7-footer who could jump out of the gym and, could do some interesting things here and there. And if you would squint, you would see someone, who looked like a good NBA player because you'd get blocks and dunks. I think that's like a floor type, outcome here. So I'm not like fully out on him, but personally, this is more of like a summer league, G League guy to me than like a two-way guy. I would rather use my two-ways on guys I think have more of a chance to really, help teams win in the NBA. And I don't really see that with Niederhauser. I like him a lot in the G League as someone like, if I have like a young guard I'm trying to develop, like, okay, here's just a big pick and roll threat. Let's have him run spread pick and roll. I think there's an outline of a player here, but I'm just not really sold on him. I draft him on a two-way. I don't know. He's kind of borderline for me in terms of two-way versus like undrafted two-way. I don't know. Coop, you did a good job kind of giving the sell, I think, but I can't get very high on a guy who I just think is kind of bad at basketball. Like, that's just the truth. And he does some good things, and maybe in the NBA he's just in super deep drop all the time, and they just stick him in the dunker spot. They don't even have him. That's another thing. Like, even though he didn't run a ton of pick and roll, I don't think he's like great at like covering ground. Like again, being a 2-foot leaper does limit the lob ability sometimes because in the NBA a lot of guys are catching lob dunks off one, and they got to really get up off one, and he just doesn't have that. Like, he is, he can dunk off one, but he's not really touch the top of the backboard and crunch one off one type of guy. He kind of needs that specific footwork, so he has to play with someone who can time those passes up a little bit better. And so again, I don't think he's I don't think anyone is wrong for having him as like even like a draftable contract guy, but it's just not really the type of thing I value enough to do that on. That's where I'm at with him. Stone, where are you at with Konan Niederhauser?
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to be a bit in between you guys, where he does have like just a natural athletic ability that he utilizes in certain ways where I think that he is like a really good screen slipper and a really good roller, and in a pick and roll can be, in theory, a really devastating finisher. The touch is just bad. The hands are bad to prevent me from buying in on that. He has very good load time. I think that's really what helps him be a rim protector, is that he is just like a great athlete. I don't think it's elite like outlier levels, but it is very, very good for his size. And I think that it's difficult for me to fade all the way on a guy like that. But I agree that for me, the age just comes into play so much here, where it's not a binary for every prospect that the age matters to the same degree. But I think with Konan Niederhauser here, it's just really problematic considering where the level of feel is. He, I think, showed that like at this year especially, he has great recovery tools. There are times where Penn State used him to go help at the top of the key, and then he had to go back and recover to be in the paint as a primary rim protector, and I think that it was really credible to watch at times, like how quickly he got back to the paint and recovered. Like the recovery tools and stuff are there. He's a great lob threat guy with how quickly he loads and how big he is, but the hands are just not there. Historically, he's a really high fouler. There's times where you see that on film. He's cut it down quite a bit, but he has times of just being overly aggressive, with just dumb fouls that he doesn't need to be putting on himself. So all in all, like there's a lot to like, and I think it was a great call on Jackson Hayes of being a guy that is not necessarily a great field, but he's athletic enough to have sticked in the NBA for as long as he has. And I think, like, as a Lakers fan watching a lot of games of his, like, for me, he's a borderline backup to, like, maybe a third string to a borderline backup, but very clearly like an NBA player, just is not someone that is going to have a huge impact on winning. So for me, like where I landed on him, I'm also on the border of two different tiers, just a little bit higher than Bryce, where I'm, is this a guy that I basically want at the last of my firmly draftable tier, or is he someone that I would prioritize as a two-way guy? I don't know yet. I think I'm going to have to, think about it and ponder it a little bit, but he's sort of right on the fringe there for me.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of guy who I would probably want to bring in on a two-way at first. And if you bring him in, like I'd draft him, the second is kind of a shit show at a certain point. You draft him, you bring him into summer league, you give him, the 7 games to see what he can do. And if he shits the bed, you just swap him out for an actual two-way player. If this is a guy who you just think is too far away, then okay, then no harm, no foul. Send him down to your G League team. If he's that bad, nobody else is going to pick him up. I do think he's firmly draftable in the second round, though, for me. And if for me in the second round, it's about guys who have something they can contribute to an NBA floor. And I do think Niederhauser's athleticism, I really like the transition stuff. I think there's a world where the shot blocking is okay enough. And I do think that kind of specialty change of pace big is worth taking the swing on, even if he is only at best a weird backup. So you guys ready to move on to part 2 of our Versus series?
Absolutely. I've rarely been more ready to talk about a single prospect this year than I am to talk about Amari Williams from Kentucky by way of Drexel, by way of Nottingham, England. Are we supposed to refer to it as what's it called? The UK, United Kingdom? Is England different from the United Kingdom? I mean, I'm pro-Irish independent.
Yes,
so
it is.
How does that tie in? Whatever. Like it's a whole thing. But anyways,
we're not about geopolitics here on Upside Swings.
But we are pro-IRA, just so we're
yes, that's it.
Anyways, that's really stupid. But Amari Williams was a guy who I pointed out to some people like 2 years ago at Drexel. I was like, man, this is a really interesting, like high usage, high volume playmaking big who also like is a great rebounder. And this year he goes to Kentucky, and Kentucky, of course, under Mark Pope runs this really interesting kind of modified Princeton offense where it's a lot of, he's sort of a chin merchant, but also there's all this like complicated movement, and he just had a really successful season, I thought, and kind of was, I would say, kind of the most consistent player on Kentucky this year. Owe was a bigger scorer, and Lamont Butler had his moments, but I would say Amari Williams was the most consistent game-to-game player on this Kentucky team. I think that stands out. Now, the big question mark with him already, he's a January 28, 2002 birthday. One of the only people we'll talk about older than me in this draft class. His rookie season will be his age 24 season. I'd have to really look it up, but there's some players that are still discussed as like young players that are about Amari Williams' age. Like I'm pretty sure Jalen Green is not much older than Amari Williams.
He's like exactly your age, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. So I just that's a bad sign in some ways, right? Though good sign, measured at 6'10 and a half without shoes, with a 9'3 standing reach and a 7'6 wingspan, with 10 by 10 hands. So he's a big guy, bigger than I think maybe some realized. I think some maybe thought he was an undersized center, but a 9'3 standing reach, that's taller than Konan Niederhauser. So, he can at least really extend up towards the rim. This season at Kentucky, he averaged 10.9 points, 8.5 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 0.6 steals, and 1.2 blocks on 56.1, 25, 62.3 shooting splits. He did turn the ball over 2.3 times, which is a bit of a worry. But there's some okay stuff in there, especially with his, pretty solid advanced stats, where he had an 8.7 BPM, 110 offensive rating, 26.9 usage rate, 56.3 effective field goal rate, 58.7 true shooting, 10.3 offensive rebound rate, 29.7 defensive rebound rate, 24.7 assist rate to a 20.5 turnover rate, which is a 1.4 assist to turnover, 6.1 block rate, 1.4 steal rate, 74.4% free throw rate, which is really good. 3.9 fouls committed per 40, not great, though he did dunk 40 times. Shot 69.3% on 150 close twos, 35.9% on 92 long twos, only 62.3% on 183 free throw attempts, and only took 4 total threes. He has never taken more than 15, and when he took 15, he did not shoot it particularly well. There's some interesting stats from his time at Drexel, too, that I'm not really going to go over, but safe to say he was more of a high-volume block guy and steal guy. He was more of a defensive havoc guy. Turned the ball over a little bit more because he had to do a little bit more, was a little bit less efficient because he was, the center of the scouting report. The place I want to start with the sell here is that this is a guy whose game was pretty consistent and you can maybe even say stepped up at times against high-level competition. Against top 50 teams this year, the assist rate went up, the rebounding rates went up. Now, the block rate did go down. The free throw rate went up, and he shot about the same on close twos, and I do think that is something that matters to me. Against top-level teams, he was still a really valuable player. So even if you want to add his Drexel sample into this, he was not quite as or it was against lower level competition, but he was on a really good team in a really good SEC, playing against NBA competition all the time, and he tended to play well. Like again in games like Alabama and Tennessee. He played well against NBA, even sub-NBA, but really good future pros overall. I think that this is like DILF Derek Queen. That's my sell for Amari Williams, which I know Coop is going to be really excited about. I think the handle's real for a guy this big. Not like crazy manipulative, and he will turn it over, especially like he's not as strong as Derek Queen. He bounces off guys a little harder. But this is another guy where I think even though the age he's older, there's something to be said for being a little bit of a late bloomer. He doesn't come from a basketball, a country that, has produced a ton of basketball talent. So their minor leagues and their lower level basketball systems is just less developed. I've recruited guys from the UK before, and that's something that you have to factor in is that, hey, there's just not good basketball in a lot of the UK level, and these guys really have to figure out, just how different things are. Every year he played, he was productive and efficient. And while I do think the passing, there's a little bit of chin merchant there in terms of, that's what they ran, and he got to just stand at the top of the key with the ball a lot. What I really like about the passing, it's really reactive and it's really quick. His decision-making is super quick. He has great touch on his passes. And what I'll give you an example of in that way is a lot of people like Tosan Abovwan when he was coming out. And I didn't particularly because I thought he was a chin merchant in the bad way. And Abovwan would not really throw like tight window backdoors to small guards. If you will, that's not what you want to do. Amari Williams has multiple assists this year where he is like hitting Lamont Butler right in his hand as he's about to go to finish. Like it's absolutely gorgeous. His touch on passes. He had really great chemistry with Kobe Brea, finding him as a shooter all the time. And this Kentucky team really did not have consistently great spacing once I can't remember his name. The one BYU transfer went down. He got hurt.
Jackson Robinson,
who was a really important part of this team. When he went down, their spacing was not great. And Amari Williams kind of was a big part of keeping their head up in terms of even with bad spacing, he could throw tight window passes. He could find guys as cutters, and he had great chemistry with their best shooter, one of the best shooters in the country, to maximize the amount of spacing. He's also really good at turning DHOs downhill and finishing. As a finisher this year, he was he dunked 40 times, and 9 of those were self-created dunks. 2 of those self-created dunks were transition dunks, but he had 7 true half-court self-created dunks. And what I meant by that is I didn't count post-up dunks as self-created. I only counted perimeter attacks as self-created dunks, and he dunked 6 times by turning down DHOs and getting downhill. He has really good feel for how to get to his spot as a driver without having to hit like a million moves, without taking a ton of time, and without being greedy. You see a lot of guys who are good at turning down DHOs turn them down too much and get stonewalled and lose the ball as they're driving. And he would do that every once in a while, but he found the balance between passing, actually handing the DHO off, turning DHOs downhill, and then Barkleying DHOs and seeing skip passes. He found all of these things, really he found the balance between all of these things really, really well, in my opinion. And I also think he showed a lot as a grab and go guy and like a excuse me, and a home run passer. He threw quite a few, not quite a few, but a couple, really, really nice full court outlet passes to Otega Owe. There were a couple times where he grabbed the ball and he would push in transition and he would find someone for a pass. Or again, 2 of his dunks were one was a steal and then the other one was against Troy in the NCAA tournament. He just grabs a rebound, brings the ball up, and just attacks all the way to the rim and dunks on someone. Now it's against Troy. I'm not going to pretend like that's the highest level of competition or anything, but I do think there's something to be said for just how consistently effective he is with the ball in his hands for someone this big. And that's rare. The truth is, that's a skill that tends to maximize in value in the NBA, where the spacing is a little better, where the NBA is going to find more uses for you to do that because NBA offenses are just a little bit more complex, a little bit more reads based. And I think his combo of intelligence and athleticism and just pure size is really, really intriguing. I think there's something, to be said for guys who can just consistently operate DHOs and have really good DHO chemistry as being some of the most valuable backup bigs or even, lower level starter bigs in the league. I mean, Domantas Sabonis has made an all-star career out of mostly just being really, really good at operating DHOs. Like the primary part of Domantas Sabonis's offense is DHO operation. And I think Amari Williams, while that level is obviously really, really high, can be a really high level DHO operator in the NBA. I also think that he just has really good sense for cutters. And while I think there's problems with the finishing, at a certain percentage, he was in the 79th percentile, shot 64.9% at the rim in total, and 58.8% on layups, again, while dunking 40 total times. I just think that he is a really solid kind of downhill driving, decision-making 5. There's some questions here. The shot is bad. The defense I have questions about, and I want to save that. But that's my sell. Decision-making, downhill driving 5. What pushback or questions do you guys have for me on Williams?
I guess I'll start with am underwhelmed, I would say, by the finishing is really the big thing for me. I think the touch isn't great, and I don't think he has like a lot of post moves or anything because a lot of it is the fact that he just doesn't have a very strong lower body. Um, so I think he's somewhat relegated, despite having more use offensively, as you laid out as sort of a passer and guy you could run things through a little bit. Um, I I question what he does at an NBA level as a scorer outside of being someone that just really operates a lot out of the dunker spot as a scorer. Um, but maybe you can clarify.
No, I agree that the touch is not great on finishes. Now he did shoot a good percentage, but what I like most about the finishing is he's really dogged getting contact. Again, he had a 74.4% free throw rate this year. He gets to the line all the time because he is trying to hunt contact. He'll miss some bunnies, and he is super left-handed. He will not go to that right hand like at all. Guys will sit completely when he's supposed to. They will sit completely on his right shoulder and just dare him. Please try to make a scoop right hand layup. They are begging him, and he is going to try and get back to that left hand. I agree that there's problems with the finishing. And there's a problem with the translation of his finishing, but when you dunk this percentage of your layup attempts, I think that's really good. Or of your at rim attempts, I think that's really good. And when you get fouled this much, I think that's really good. I think both those things can kind of overcome some of the finishing issues. And I disagree of him being a dunker spot guy primarily because I just think he's a really good driver. Like he can just, let's say you put him like on a bench unit with like a better version or the older version of Duncan Robinson, right? Where bigs have to get up to touch because if you're like super dropped off of him, then Duncan Robinson is just going to step into a wide open Johnson. And Amari Williams is a good screener too, like willing to lay the wood. He's not quite as strong as you want, but he's willing to seek that contact. He's willing to hit guys. He's just kind of physically really tough. Okay, if you come up to touch and he gets a step on a big, he is probably going to get fouled. He's going to get that big in foul trouble. Or if that big isn't going to be able to stay attached well enough, he might just turn downhill and dunk. Or if you bring over help, he can throw that skip pass. He didn't flash a ton of passing on the move, but I do think he's great at reading before he catches the ball and making decisions, quickly. And so I think that can develop into some more live dribble passing. And I think, he has a good sense for a really good sense for finding cutters. So let's say he turns down DHO and drives and someone cuts or there's someone in the opposite dunker spot. I think he can make those reads really well. So I think that he's a more total finisher, even with my questions about the finishing than you do, just because he's able to consistently generate those looks and he gets fouled a shit ton. And that does matter a lot.
My big question is, this is a guy who, if he doesn't predetermine or like read the floor before he gets the ball, he loves to stare down his passes. He really likes to, and he's really good at like delivering passes to the guys he stares down. He's really good at finding good angles, fun deliveries. But a lot of his turnovers are just him standing at the top of the key, staring down the guy he's going to throw the ball to, and then like throwing the pass like 5 seconds after he catches the ball and decides that's where he's going to get the ball. Part of that's offensive execution, but I do think that's a large chunk of the turnover issues. That 20.5% turnover is scary. I'd say as much as he had a really high assist percentage, it's really hard to survive with that high of a degree of turnovers as a DHO operator guy, as a, the way you kind of see him as more of a playmaking, even in just like the getting to the rim sense big. So how do you view his passing? And then do you think that's going to get better in the NBA with spacing or what is your explanation there for the turnover stuff?
I do think that a lot of the turnovers were some bad predetermines. There were some bad. There was times where because he's so willing to seek contact, but he's not consistently, strong enough to handle that contact. He would seek contact as a driver and then lose the ball because he just got hit harder than he expected. And he can be a bit of a predetermined. That's absolutely fair. I think the flashes of him making reads that aren't predetermined, making quick decisions, and the little bits here and there of, high level manipulation. Like there was a couple times where, especially out of the post, where, he's really reading, hey, are they going to drop down to what I really want right now is I want to create a Kobe Bryant 3. So he'll spin baseline. Andrew Carr will lift from the dunker spot to the center of the floor. He'll fake a pass there and find Kobe Bryant in the corner on a hammer action or whatever. That stuff is so good to me that I'm willing to overlook some of the turnover issues, especially because I think a lot of the turnovers are him trying to create high leverage looks. He's not turning the ball over in situations where he's just getting like sped up with the ball, or he's throwing a pass that is just like completely no hope. He's trying to fit things in tight windows that were too tight, but the decision is still arguably correct. Especially, again, Kentucky had some real spacing issues this year, and he understood that, the offense would really stagnate if he was just always making the safe pass to a perimeter guy who wasn't going to step into a shot and shoot it. So he got more ambitious as a passer. I also think he got better. I thought his turnover rate, improved over the course of the season. And that does, I think stand out in terms of his turnover rate was pretty stagnant against top 50 teams. And, he played a higher majority of the top 50 teams later in the year. And so I just think that his overall ambition is good enough. And again, I think this is the type of thing that can be unlocked a little bit in the space and higher level, decision makers around him in the NBA. I don't really think he was actually playing with really any other NBA players on this team, this Kentucky team, which is kind of a weird thing to say. Kobe Bryant is probably the closest, but I just think Amari Williams had to do a lot more for this team than he was maybe given credit for. And so I think a good amount of the turnovers were that. There's some bad ones in there for sure. But I do think there's been this thing where people are starting to refer to, like, they're trying to find field metrics. And one that they go to a lot is assist to turnover or, just a turnover rate in general. I don't think a low turnover rate is indicative of high field at all. I actually think oftentimes it's the opposite. If guys have really low turnover rates, that tends to mean that they're not really involved in the decision-making on the floor. I think that's my big argument with Jace Richardson when people call him a high field player, is that he was so rarely involved in the decision-making that drove good offense that I just don't think that's really accurate. Amari Williams was constant. He was the lead decision-maker on the floor at all times. Even when Lamont Butler played, when Otega Owe played, whoever they were playing at quote-unquote point guard, Amari Williams was the lead decision-maker on the floor. And he did that, I would say, fairly admirably, and he turned the ball over a shit ton. You're not wrong, and that's a concern, especially given the age. But I also do think this was his first year in this system. He had, never played this level of competition before. And again, I do think it got, even if the turnover rate stagnated, the fact that it stagnated from when he was playing pretty bad teams in the preseason to when he was playing the SEC schedule, to me is indicative of the fact that it got better. So that would be my overall argument on that. What's your guys' kind of final pushback, especially your thoughts on the defense, and then I'll kind of wrap up my overall thoughts on Williams and where I'd have him.
Yeah, I thought the defense was really interesting. I think he moves his feet really well for how big he is. The ground coverage is great, legitimately awesome in a way that, they're all in the same pod, so I guess it's fair to sort of compare, where Niederhauser, I think, is great athletically at covering ground, where Amari just does it with more purpose, where I think he's more efficient covering ground. And obviously both are very athletic, but I think Amari just has a better feel of the most efficient path to covering ground. And I think that's important. He can move laterally from like one side of the paint to the other. I think he's someone that can be like a double effort guy as a shot blocker, where he's got pretty good load time on a second jump. I think he is gonna struggle defensively as a post guy, where I just don't think the lower body is super strong right now, and that's somewhat concerning for the age that he is too. Like it's not to say he can't put on more weight and muscle at this age, but it's just becomes a bit less likely than if he were 20 or something. So I mean I don't disagree. I don't have a whole lot to add with what you guys said offensively, because I don't necessarily disagree with much of it, and I think you guys covered all of it. But defensively, I also, I mean, this is a guy that I think could. There's outcomes. There's worlds of possibility where he's like an all defensive type guy, with the tools in the way that he moves, and I think he does have just generally good feel defensively, where I could see those outcomes even if they're slim.
I really defensively love the motor. I think this is a guy who tries really hard on both ends every single possession. And he wants it bad. He wants to win. He wants to kick your ass. He wants to dunk on you. He wants to finish a tough shot. He wants that rebound more than you do. I think that's kind of the thing that I really like about Williams is he is a beast on the boards, like a monster. He gets out of area rebounds. He boxes out well. He's stronger than you. He can jump higher than you. His positioning is really good. He reads balls coming off the rim really well. He does all the micro skill stuff you want from an elite rebounder. And he grabbed a ton of bricks at Kentucky and gave him a ton of second chance points, gave him, closed defensive possessions. He had no business closing. I think he's really good at knowing when to contest, when to stay down to grab rebounds. Just got a great sense for a lot of the stuff you want from an elite rebounding big. And I also think he's so athletic and he's so good at flipping his hips. And I think he slides his feet pretty well for his size, and he's so strong that he's a really interesting defensive bet, for a center. And I don't know if I see all defense, but this is a guy who could be one of the 5 to 10 best rebounders in the NBA one day. I really do believe that. And on top of having that, some offensive funk, some really fun stuff in his game, I think this is a really valuable player. It was hard for me to come up with things to push back on, but I really, Williams is great. I really like the defense. So,
yeah, the biggest issue with the defense is that the block rate goes down significantly against higher level teams. I think he's not great as like a rim protector drop guy. And he's not like a true switch big either. Like he can move his feet okay, but you've got to be more creative with him to make him really fit and be effective. But I think there's upside there again. He's just really smart, and I agree with Goody. He just is a great rebounder. He reminds me a lot at times defensively. He's not this level of mover, but he reminds me at times defensively of Jared Vanderbilt when Jared Vanderbilt was at Kentucky, because Vanderbilt was just like a crazy out of area rebounder. Amari Williams has great hands. Like he just has big, strong hands. He can really go get the ball, and he's long. One of the best indicators of rebounding level is your standing reach and your length, and he has that. He's not like a great box out guy, but he'll fight guys. I think that that's a skill that you can kind of build a solid defensive profile around, even if I have some questions about exactly how it looks, because I don't think he can be a full-time drop big. I don't think he'd be a full-time switch big. So you're asking some real questions there. But he's big, he's long, he's tough. He'll make some plays. I think teams can figure it out in a backup role. As soon as you start talking about him as a starter, I think he'd probably be a bit of a liability. He's probably around like the Sabonis level of defense, just to be honest. I think he's a better rebounder, but other than that, I don't think he's a crazy better mover of his feet. I don't think he's a crazy better a vertical athlete. He's not crazy longer. Like that's one that he'll never get compared to Sabonis as a defensive player because Sabonis is light and he looks really slow. But I actually think they're pretty similar. So again, if you're talking about starters, that's a real worry. But Sabonis was a fine defender as like a backup big, even in like a higher, minute, 22, 24 minute game backup big. He was fine. You can kind of figure some things out. And that's kind of where I come down on Amari. I just, the age is the real worry for me. And the fact that he's not elite at anything defensively. So like, I can't have him quite in my solid first round tier, but he's going to be in my late first, kind of early second tier. Right now I have him at 18, right behind Noah Penda, right above Drake Powell. This is the type of backup big that I think is super, super valuable if he hits. It's just a really great passer who can really put the ball on the floor, change the geometry of the floor a little bit, really operate DHOs, and be a valuable defender, if not an elite one. He can really rebound and secure possessions in a way that very few guys can. I also think we didn't talk about this a ton. I think he's a really good offensive rebounder, and offensive rebounding has really come back into vogue, and especially because he's the type of big who can potentially grab an offensive rebound, and then he's not going to be super slow getting back to, or he could, handle guarding a wing in transition for a minute too. Because he can do those things, like I think that's a real path to value for him. Like I just think he's I think he's a really good bet to be a good NBA player despite the age, which is rare for me to say that. In an ideal world, I would have drafted him 2 years ago after his junior year at Drexel, but the NBA was not ready for that, I guess. But I just think this is a really good basketball player, and I'm gonna bet on that despite my questions fairly highly. Like he's probably going to end as a top 22, 25 guy for me. Because I really, as I look at it, I don't think there's too many more guys that I'm going to be crazy high on. And, if he ends up as a starter, who, is really making offense sing, and then I'm going to end up being too low on it. And I have that worry just as much as I have the worry of he's just going to be completely out of the league or something, because at a certain point you're betting on guys that are probably going to be completely out of the league anyways. So my thought is, I think there's a real world that he is a high level NBA player. And I think there's also a world that even if he's not a high level NBA player, he's a really valuable backup big. And so that's a guy I'm going to bet on fairly highly. Stone, did you give your value for Williams?
I did not, but I will. I pretty much right there with you, to be honest. Like this is someone I value in that sort of range. You've convinced me to bump him up a bit, actually. I came in with this. I have my board at this point fairly filled out with a bunch of names we haven't talked about yet on the podcast, but I had him at 28th on my board, and I think I'm probably going to move him up to like 22, 23. Because I buy the median outcomes being a lot more valuable than a lot of the other names that I had previously above him, where I think this is someone that is, I think, pretty, I don't want to say scalable because I don't think his usage is going to be crazy high even at his highest end outcomes, but he's someone that I think can provide a lot of value within his range of outcomes, whether it's low or median end. And I think that holds a lot of value in and of itself. So I'm quite high on him relative to, I guess, where most people have him. I'm not sure. I think I might have seen one person that has him first round, and outside of that, and I would give them credit if I remembered who. But this is someone that I think is going to be really valuable in the NBA.
I do actually think I kind of have the inverse view of him, of you, Bryce. I think the floor is kind of high because of the rebounding. I think just his general effort and guy who's willing to go in and set hard screens and can throw backdoor passes and just gives a shit and can execute schemes makes him a pretty high-level backup big as kind of a floor. And then I do have the same worries about the defense where I do worry that he doesn't have enough special stuff on the defensive end and that there's too many question marks on the offensive end where he's the ceiling's not as high, but this is a guy who could just I'm like 90% sure he's going to come in, kick ass on the boards, give a ton of effort, and be valuable in the NBA. And I think that's a first round pick. I'm not sure. I think, to me, I'm going to have like him and Will Richard as my like priority second round value guys, because there's still the question marks. There's still so much older. There's so much weirdness there, but these are guys who you want in your organization. These are guys who you want to come in and push everyone else to be better, and to add to your culture and that kind of thing. I think that, as much as we don't want to talk about that because it's not a part of an evaluation and it's so nebulous, that's something that matters. Coming in and giving a fuck and keeping everybody locked in is valuable. There are guys who are 15th men in the NBA based on the fact that they're cool guys to be around. So it seems like Amari Williams is a cool guy to be around.
Absolutely. There's absolutely a world. This is Taj Gibson. Like, this is British Taj Gibson. And listen, is that like the most valuable thing in the world? No. But Taj Gibson had a successful NBA career where he was a starter for multiple years, mostly because he was just fucking tough as nails. And he could make good decisions with the ball and that type of stuff. And I'd be really happy with that, with Amari Williams. And I'm with you. There's a part of me that even wants to move him over Noah Penn, but I can't lie. But we're now going to transition to someone that Stone can get in his little biggie bag about. And that is Izan Almansa, the Spanish native. He's from Murcia, Spain. He's a June 7, 2005 birthday. So despite how long he's been on the radar, he's still only 20 years old, and his rookie season will be his age 20 season. He just turned 20. So he was draft eligible last year when he was playing for the G League Ignite. He did not go to the draft after that. Instead, he moved to the NBL and played a year there in a very similar way to like Bobby Clinton did, where Clinton was a draft prospect. But instead of staying where he was, went to the NBL and ended up getting drafted fairly highly. You would say Bobby did, and I think that Izan is absolutely a guy that I think is going to surprise people by how high he gets drafted, because I think the NBL has lost some luster because it had like LaMelo Ball and RJ Hampton and stuff, and it has not had like that level of guy in a while other than Josh Giddey, but it's still consistently churning out, draft picks. And Almansa this year just had a really interesting, kind of season overall. He only played 16 minutes, but he played in 36 games. He averaged 7.2 points, 4.0 rebounds, 0.8 assists, 0.4 steals, 0.3 blocks, 0.6 turnovers on 52, 30.4, 58.6 shooting splits. He had a 55.4% true shooting, 53.7% effective field goal rate, 9.3 offensive rebound rate, 18.4 defensive rebound rate, 13.8 total rebound rate, 7.1 assist rate, 7.9 turnover rate. Neither of those numbers are crazy. 1.2 steal rate, 1.7 block rate, 18% usage. This was, again, in a pro league that we talked about. He was much more productive than someone like Rocco Zikarsky, but not crazy productive. For what it's worth, 6'9.25" without shoes, so a real 6'10". He had a 9'1.5" standing reach because he has a 7'1 3/4 wingspan. You would say that's a little undersized for a center. He's like maybe just like a smidge below the general center size. You kind of look at 9'2" as like your sort of average for center standing reaches. He's a little below that. No, he's not crazy small, but he's just a little bit undersized. Stone, what's your sell here with Almansa? Why are you so in on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's full transparency. Like, this is the exact kind of player that I fall for, and I'm trying to distance myself from that in terms of the end evaluation with him. But I think he's just a very fundamentally sound player on both ends of the court that really allows him to succeed. He's pretty simplistic as a finisher. He has a lot of hooks, baby hooks, but the touch looks pretty decent to me. I wouldn't say it's great, but I think it's better than the other two guys that we've talked about. I think he could do better to develop more post moves, but I think in at least the short term, it's effective enough to be somewhat of a threat. The touch is inconsistent, but I do think that there's a lot more flashes than either guy that we've previously discussed right now. He's definitely a drop big defensively, but I think in that role, he really just knows where to be at all times. And he's not the longest. I think he's probably definitely the smallest guy that we've talked about, but he is really strong. He's someone that can really hold his own against bigger guys because he has a really strong lower body, really good at defending post ups. He's not super athletic, and especially the way the other two are in recovery. And I think that's probably the biggest issue I have with him defensively as a drop big. But he is very disciplined. He doesn't have to be in recovery a lot of times because he's not overly jumping for blocks. He's not really out of areas that he shouldn't be. And I think that it limits the amount that he has to be in recovery. Offensively, I think he's just a super crafty player, extremely crafty with a lot of fakes. If you really pay attention to the detail with Almansa, you'll notice like a lot of these subtle head fakes, eye movements that I think because he's not super athletic, it allows he's really excelled in figuring out ways to create advantages for himself in these real subtle, crafty ways. But I would say the athleticism has noticeably gotten better from this year to last. He was doing more straight line drives than we've ever seen previously with him. He just looks more confident and stronger as a straight line driver, where the handle is not something he's going to create with necessarily, but he can, I think, attack open driving lanes where that wasn't previously something that was sort of on the table for him. There's basically no help side rim protection. He's not someone that's going to be able to be playing in, I think, multi-big lineups. Like he's probably going to have to be your sole big. So it limits the versatility defensively. But I think there's just a lot here to be a really solid backup big that you can feel pretty solid about putting in for 15 to 18 minutes a game and feel like you're not losing any ground, which is something that currently in the NBA I think is a big issue. Like I think a lot of teams are not super comfortable with the backup bigs that they have and putting them in there to feel confident that they can maintain leads and the momentum that they have. And I think Almansa is somebody that has the possibility of doing that more so than a lot of other guys.
I do worry. So my big question really is that this is a guy who's so touch reliant, like from as a scorer, as a downhill scorer, and he's just not that efficient, and he doesn't have great touch indicators for a guy who is so touch reliant. So how do you kind of like? Is it just the flashes that you're really buying? Is it that it's like such a consistent part of his game and with better spacing and in a different context, it'll be better? But like, how do you sort of come to terms with that efficiency gap and as an interior scorer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is somewhat flashes right now. Like it's inconsistent from like quarter to quarter almost, even possession to possession. Like it looks really good on some shots, and then on other shots he's bricking them. And we didn't mention it with the other guys. The other two, not to this is, I guess, like a versus podcast, so I will bring them up. But there's like really bad touch stuff with them where they're airballing like hooks and stuff that is, I don't think, happening with Almansa. But you're right in the fact that it is not consistent. And I think the way I would frame it is that I don't really think Almansa has been on a team with adequate spacing. And I also don't think he's been on a team where he has a great creator. I mean, he had Scoot, but I don't think Almansa was used in that way, in that context where he's being created for at the Ignite. And I think in a role where he's less reliant on the craftiness that he has to do prior to putting up shots, and is more of a spoon-fed type big, I think that the touch and efficiency goes up a little bit. And I don't know how high. I'm not saying that he's going to be this uber efficient big or anything, but I don't think that in a better context in the NBA that it's currently where it has been at.
So one last follow up with that, just on this touch point. I don't have the numbers. I don't have access to them, but I do feel like he was a more efficient player when he played with the Spanish team, and he was more able to kind of be, schemed. He was more schemed as the guy, for that team, and there were better guys setting him up. And also, my worry is that he's so much more touch reliant than the guys we talked about. Yes, the other guys have worse touch from further out, but he takes more of these touch push shots than either of them probably combined.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth, not to interrupt you, Stone, but just I do have numbers on this, so I will use my advantage as a college coach here. For this year in the NBL, he was in the 69th percentile, shooting 44.7% on 38 total runners. Good percentile. Generally, you're not happy with a big shooting 44.7% on any 2-point shot, just kind of the truth. And he was in the 46th percentile, shooting 41% on 39 hook shots. For his national team, I'll go kind of U20 team instead of the top national team. He was 5 for 7 on runners, which was good. Obviously, that's not a ton. He was 6 for 14 on hook shots, which is not particularly good. But he was an overall good, at rim finisher. He shot 73% on 37 at rim attempts for that team, compared to this year, where at the rim in totality, he shot 66.2%. Statistically, he was a fine finisher. I just think he's the big worry for me is he's just really contact avoidant versus Amari Williams wasn't. And I think that does show a little bit in just, he doesn't get fouled a ton. He doesn't get to the line a ton. And he's more, again, like Coop said, more touch reliant, even though the touch is good. Is it good enough for him to develop a jumper or something? I don't know that I would say that. He hasn't really been a high volume jump shooter at any point. He's multiple times, catching on the perimeter, looking at the rim, and then, turning away because he doesn't want to, even think about shooting. He's never been guarded like a shooter. And generally for me, and this is maybe a little bit personal bias thing, when it comes to projecting guys to the NBA, I want guys who are contact finishers rather than touch finishers. Touch is a great indicator, especially for smaller guys. But for big guys, I think it's way more important that you're willing to just put your head down and go through someone and score, because you're more likely to get fouled. And fouls have multiple benefits. A layup is worth 2 points. But a foul, even if you're not a great free throw shooter, is also a foul on that other big. So especially for guys I'm projecting as backup bigs, I do personally want guys who are going to seek contact. So do you think the touch is good enough that he overcomes that? Or, what's kind of your overall feel for him as a finisher and kind of offensive? How does that project him as an offensive player?
Yeah, I think a lot of what he does as a guy prior to putting up his shots around the rim, the craftiness that I talked about previously, can be parlayed into someone that makes quick decisions at times. He's never been in a role where he's any sort of playmaker or anything. And I don't think I'm not projecting him to be that necessarily, but I do think that there's stuff there with how crafty he is, where if asked to do so, in another role where he can be making pretty interesting passes out of post-ups, where he can create these little windows of opportunity to make these dump-offs that we've seen flashes of, but he's never been in a role where that's been relied upon for him. And I'm not saying now that he's going to the NBA, against tougher defenses, that is going to be his role. I'm just saying that I think that exists for him in a way where he hasn't had the spacing to do so. It sounds like I'm higher than you on this, but I think there's a world where he is someone that can be a serviceable 3-point shooter. I don't think he'll ever be good, but I think he's someone that maybe can put up 3 attempts a game as a backup and shoot 34% from 3. Like, I think those outcomes exist for him, and I'm not saying I'm drafting him thinking that's going to happen, but this year in particular, I think was really encouraging for me to circle back and be back in on Almansa, because he started experimenting with things that he didn't do prior. He was putting up more threes in limited time. He was experimenting with this sort of attacking closeouts that he really hadn't done prior. Like, there's things where I think this year, against probably the most tough competition he's faced, it sort of led me to believe that still at only 20, there's more development to be had here. And maybe with a full kind of wish, and, you know, I'm not here to tell people what they should and shouldn't do, but if we had another year of evaluating prior to the NBA, I think that we could have seen Almansa put up a lot more interesting things where he'd be talked about as like a consensus first round guy, with the sort of exploration he did with his game this year that he was putting up. So it is somewhat of a projectability thing here with him, where I think there's more to unlock with someone that's only 20, that showed flashes more than he had in prior years of different things he hadn't really done before. But I also have this bias where I really buy kind of guys with these high feel. And you know, it doesn't always work out for me, obviously, but guys with high feel for me are just hard to bet against. And I think Almansa, especially of the guys we talked about, but just in general, is a pretty high feel big, especially defensively. But I wouldn't push back too hard against the fact that he just is not – he's not putting up shots that seek out contact, but he's also not someone like a Neat Clifford that we talked about prior, where he's going out of his way to do like these sort of crazy moves to just get around contact at all costs, because he's not like super slender. He has somewhat of a stronger frame. And I think he's always been like this more finesse guy. So I don't know. Maybe I'm over projecting, over indexing the flashes that we saw that we hadn't seen prior, but there's enough for me personally to think that this is a better backup bet than a lot of other guys that are in this class.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the development as a straight line driver and a ball handler is really stark. Like, I was watching some of his tape after, like, I went back and read my Almansa notes from when he was at G League Ignite and all this stuff. He's a different guy on offense. He, as much as he's still contact averse, he's driving, he's, you know, being far more aggressive with the ball in his hands in a very real way. Even if the finishing is still kind of scary at times. I just, and also he's just kind of slimmed out a little bit, you know, maybe not like lost weight, but he's packed on more muscle. He's a little bigger, a little longer. I think he's just a far more functional player with the funk of a straight line drive in there with his random touch skills.
I would also just add to that this sort of exploration of his game and development trajectory came against like some of the strongest dudes that he's ever played against. Like, the NBL is just chock full of like super physical. It's an extremely physical league, maybe the most physical in the world, right? And I think the fact that he still found ways around that level of physicality, despite being this non-contact guy, and was still, despite the physicality, able to do impressive things as a finisher and put up what he did, is somewhat impressive to me as well.
Yeah, for what it's worth, Perth was good too. Like he was, contributing on a good team, right? They were 18-11, fairly good team. Not a great team or anything, but a fairly good team. And he was contributing on that team. He was playing with guys like Dylan Windler and Christian Doolittle and some other names you might recognize. Bryce Cotton is the obvious one. The big I have those questions. I agree with you guys. I think the big skill that maybe we haven't hit on enough is, and what I think he's really good at is, I think he's what Coop was kind of selling Niederhauser as. I just really like how he runs the floor. He's just a really fluid athlete for someone this size. I kind of disagree, Stone, that he's like a high feel guy. I just don't see that in his tape. Like in the G League Ignite, he did more playmaking, and he had moments of that. And in FIBA stuff, he's done more playmaking, and he's had his share of that here and there, but he's never been like a high volume playmaker. He's never struck me as like a crazy high field guy or anything, but I just think that he's been just consistently really effective as like using his fluidity as an athlete. He can put the ball in the deck and attack closeouts now a little bit. He can turn out some DHOs. He didn't do it a ton, and again, he's hampered by his lack of physicality. But what I really like is that he runs the floor and like he'll just beat bigs back all the time. That is something that matters in the NBA from time to time because, again, it's an 82-game season. If you can score 6 points a game in transition as a rim running big, like that'll open up a lot. No, he's not a great athlete, but he can explode off one. He's every once in a while he'll get pretty ambitious as a vertical athlete, trying to dunk on someone that he really doesn't have any right to. He's going to struggle. I think he's going to struggle as a finisher in half court settings, but I think he's a potentially great transition big, including as someone who's could be like a quick, change sides of the floor, doing like some, getting into some chin stuff at the top or running quick drag screens and making reads there. I think he can do that type of stuff well because he can just flow from action to action. We haven't talked much about the defense. I've kind of said my piece on the offense. Stone, you've talked about that. Stone, what level of defender do you think Almansa is?
Yeah, man, I think I touched on it a little bit, but I think he's very much just a drop big. Like he's not super versatile. He can't hang on the perimeter, but he is, I think, really good in that drop role. Not necessarily like elite or anything, but he's got a really strong lower body. I think he's really fundamentally sound with his footwork to be able to defend post-ups really well. I think he just knows how to play the middle and how to drop at the right times. His timing is really good as a drop guy. He's not offering help side rim protection. He's not doing anything other than being like this drop big, but I think in that role there's stuff to be had there because he's polished. He's a polished drop defender. And I think that is really pretty much the sell with him. Like he can defend post-ups. He's really polished as a drop big. I'm not going to lie. Like there's not anything else to be had there. I don't think there's really any other role he can play. But that is for me the sell.
Yeah, not the toolsiest, nothing crazy. He's going to get in there. He's going to get the job done, and he can execute. And that's kind of what you need from a backup big. Like a guy like Yanic, you worry that he can even do that. If he could execute like Almansa can right now, he'd probably be a first-round pick. So I do worry because he's a little smaller. He's, not the strongest, but I say he knows how to use his strength really well and his leverage. But he's just fine. I don't think there's anything crazy on that end, and that's fine for the backup big bet he is.
Yeah, I think he's really active. I like the activity quite a bit. I think that he plays hard. He'll run around, which has improved. That I think the motor had some questions in his younger days, and I thought it looked really good in the NBL. I'm thinking there's probably been a little bit of a wake up call from someone who there was a time where Almansa was talked about as like an expected top 20 pick, and we even talked about him in our early G League Ignite podcast last year as someone who is probably like a first round type guy. But I worry he's really unimpactful. He can do things, and I don't think he'll ever really be a drop big in the NBA. I just think he's too small and not athletic enough, especially like he can't jump out of a back pedal. He, I think, has to be kind of a switch big. And I think there's potential for that. Like he kind of moves well. He's kind of active. He uses his hands fairly well, but he was really unproductive as a defender. And to me, that does show a little bit of maybe a slightly lower feel. Like he's technically really good at things, but I don't think he's super naturally reactive and high feel. And so I have my concerns in that way. Can he survive defensively? Probably. But I think the defense really, really limits the ceiling. And when you're talking about someone whose ceiling is like a passable backup big, that does become a little bit of a worry for me. So Stone, what's your pushback on that? And then what's kind of your final ranking here on Almansa?
Yeah, in terms of the switch stuff, like in the G League, they used him a lot as this guy to come help on doubles, and he just, whenever was on the perimeter, just absolutely got cooked. And I think the recovery is just really bad. I have a lot more concerns with him personally. I guess I somewhat, we just have different views of the role that he's best at defensively. But I think overall the sell for me is that, like, even though the ceiling is more limited, probably than either guy we've talked about, maybe not Niederhauser, but I think the floor for me is like he's a lot closer to being an NBA backup big than somebody like Niederhauser or somebody like that we've talked about prior, like Broom or something. Like I think that outcome is just a lot more tangible for Almansa because he's just really good at a lot of things already. And there's still some developmental stuff there that maybe I'm buying too much that I saw this year. And I think it's worth noting the fact that he's played in like three very different contexts, three very different roles at very different levels, and each time showed different things. He's only 20, and sort of each time we watch him, and we've been watching him for a while, we find new things that we like about him. And I think that there's still room in that developmental trajectory to find those more things with him. But yeah, I mean, if he can really be someone that builds on what he did this season as a straight line driver, that he can, now you're talking about a guy that can do that. And I don't think it's off the table that he's someone that puts up a couple threes a game and is shooting in the mid 30s with them. I think there's room for upside there where he's doing a lot of different things at a good level, not great at any one thing necessarily. And for me, that's worth taking overall as like a firmly draftable guy in the high second, probably the high second round in this class. And I think that there's not a lot of NBA teams that feel comfortable when they're putting their backup big. That hasn't always been the case, especially when we first started. I think there's more of a plethora of them, but currently there seems to be, I think, a lack of trust with putting your backup big in for an extended period of time. And I think with Almansa, that those fears sort of subside quite a bit, even if he's not putting up, numbers that can make him any sort of starter or anything. I feel like he's someone that I feel best about holding the line in comparison to a lot of other names in this class.
Yeah, I think I'm just quite a bit lower than you. I think even backup bigs tend to have more upside, right? So like I think Amari Williams is fairly likely to be an okay backup big, and I think he also just has way more upside than Almansa. So I completely get what you're saying, and I also understand that this is your type of guy, and you've hit on this type of guy before. This is not my type of guy. I'm willing to just look at a prospect and say that. I prefer bigger time athletes who are a little bit less right play oriented and a little bit more kind of home run type guys at times. To be honest, that's what I like from my NBA bets at sort of the lower end of a draft. And so I acknowledge that this is more of a taste thing than anything. I think Almansa is solidly likely to have an NBA career. At a certain point, he's been around the prospect zone forever. He's young, he's played in high-level leagues and been effective and productive. He just hasn't been quite as effective or productive as I would want. He's just not quite as big or as athletic or as skilled as I would want. So all those things to me just kind of leave it, fairly open. I'd probably give him a two-way. He's probably even a draftable two-way guy for me. I prefer him to like a Janai Broom or Danny Wolf, but I don't think I prefer him to like Rocco Zikarsky. Like I think I'd probably rather take Rocco than Almansa. So that's kind of where I'm at. Coop, what was your feeling here with Almansa?
I like Almanza as a second round guy. I like him solidly more than like a Penda, or I like him slightly more than Yanic. I just think a guy who can come in and play at his size, he's still developing. I think I buy the feel more than you, Bryce. So high feel, can execute, can come in, good touch, that kind of thing. I just like Almanza. I've loved Almanza as long as we've been watching him, and he continues to get better. And as much as I do have my worries, I think a guy who's 6'10" and can dribble in a straight line and has good touch is worth the swing. And a guy who's good international player. He's cool. So I want to take the swing on cool guys also. So, and he's got that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. This has been, maybe a little bit nicer than I had expected or hoped. I was maybe hoping we'd be a little bit more mad at each other, but it is what it is. I like Amari Williams a lot. This is, for me, we're at the point in the draft now where I'm just looking for guys that I might like a lot. I liked Hansen Yang quite a bit, and I like Amari Williams quite a bit. And those two have something pretty similar in common, I suppose, that they're just big guys who can sling that rock around and play a lot of chin. So say what you will. They're also from countries that have not produced many NBA players. I actually don't know who the last British NBA player was.
OG.
I couldn't tell. Who?
OG Anunoby.
OG Anunoby's from the UK?
Yeah, isn't
Yes.
Sochan half British too?
Yeah,
So-
but he's Swiss. I mean, like
He's Polish.
or
It's-
Polish, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but OG's British.
OG's he's like full British. Yeah.
My bad. Never mind. My fault. No, that's on me. It is what it is. But I really enjoyed this podcast. Enjoyed talking with you guys. We'll be back in a couple of days. At this point, you guys can probably expect the podcast to be every other day things leading up to the draft. I think that's kind of the timing we're on right now, or at the very least, like once every 3 days. We're putting these out pretty quick and having some fun with it. So, really enjoying what we're doing. For Coop at @LA_Coop for Stone_Court. I'm at Bryce_14. This has been the Upside Swings to Be a Draft podcast. We hope we are ceiling. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Hit the bell for those notifications. It's that time of year, fellas. We're really only a couple weeks from the draft, and it's an exciting time. So make sure you're paying attention and watching, and hopefully we're providing some really interesting analysis. So feel free to comment, let us know your thoughts, and yeah, that's all we got. Thank you.
So it gives you that option whenever you record, and it's gonna be like one of those cringy like 2012 intro videos. It's gonna be like,
Oh yeah, like these
Are you gonna be
crazy
saying
EDM.
like welcome to the Upside Swing Draft Podcast with like a
Welcome
British
to the-
accent?
No, we're not bringing back the British accent.
Welcome to Upside Swings. It is. All right.
Okay.
You got your back of the video
Yeah,
content.
there we
All
go.
right. God damn it. Okay.